Let's now move on to main topic number 3. And our third main topic today gets submitted to us by Jack Drees, who writes, "The Golden Globes have spoken." Who cares? Inspired by Pedro Pascal's performance as the lead role on The Mandalorian, it was just announced by the Hollywood Foreign Press, which is, of course, the organization that runs the Golden Globes, association group in charge of Golden Globes, that voice-only performances will not be eligible for nominations during their awards season. What are your thoughts on this? All right. First off, let's be clear. As my father would always say, the Golden Globes are as useless as tits on a bull. They're just completely useless, whatever. But they do exist and a lot of people watch them. And I gotta say, they put on an entertaining show. The Golden Globes,
sure.
Hey, listen, as much as I don't like the Golden Globes, as much as I have no respect for the Golden Globes or hold their awards in any regard whatsoever, I gotta say, their show is something to watch. They put on an entertaining show.
Especially the last hour when everyone is so shit-faced.
It's getting drunk,
and you just pan the audience and they are all just schnockered beyond belief.
It's great. And I've actually said before, I think the Oscars can learn a thing or two from the Golden Globes. Maybe not getting everybody drunk, but that might be fun too.
I mean, the number of empty champagne bottles on the table by the end of the show is hysterical.
But they put on a good show. But anyway, they decided to address an issue because the Mandalorian stuff did bring up a question with Pedro Pascal, a very high-profile, fantastic actor. You're never really seeing Pedro Pascal, and really, as we learned in watching the Mandalorian editorial, most of the time it wasn't even him in the costume. Most of the time, there was they had two different body doubles. One who was a gunfighter expert who did all the gunfighting stuff. Another was a jiu-jitsu guy who did all the physical combat stuff. And then once in a little while, it would actually be Pedro Pascal in there. But anyway, the issue kind of came up for them in talking about voice only, and because we've seen a number of performances where you don't actually see the actors, but you hear the voices. Scarlett Johansson in Her.
I was just thinking about that last night.
What was an example? There was some talk about, should Scarlett Johansson get a nomination for Best Supporting Actress, even though she was just a voice, right? The Golden Globes have decided to come out and codify this, which I respect, I gotta say. But basically, it says, this is from Variety. Announced by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association on Wednesday, voice-only performances are not eligible in any acting category. That means even if characters are physically in the scenes, actors whose faces are not visible are not eligible in any acting category. In The Mandalorian, which aired last fall, Pascal was in costume and hidden under the helmet throughout the show. Actually, he wasn't in costume throughout the show. 8 episodes, first season. I'm going to say something I don't often get or care to say. I've got to give credit to the Golden Globes for this. If for no other reason, because it clarifies what their position on this is. And listen, this is going to be unpopular with a lot of people, but I agree with this decision. Because what I've said the whole time is that what you're doing with your voice as an audience member, I'm speaking as an audience member, what an actor does with their voice is a very important thing, of course, in the performance that I get as an audience member. However, it's only part of portraying the character and the performance of what happens. The physicality, how you act with your body, and being physically there in the screen is another huge part of that. It's like saying, you know, can you win Best Car of the Year if all you have is the steering wheel? You can't function a car without the steering wheel. You need the steering wheel. But can you call it the best car of the year if all you've got is the steering wheel? And that's kind of my feeling on that. Like, the voices are great. It's an important part of it, but it's not the total thing of bringing a performance. And I don't think somebody who only has to do half of the job should be given more credit over somebody who not only does their voice, but also brings the physical manifestation of the performance to the screen. It's just apples and oranges. It's a different thing. And so, and listen, the Golden Globes could have gone very quietly without ever addressing this and just never nominate somebody who only does voice and stuff like that. And that would have been fine. But I gotta say, as somebody who dumps on the Golden Globes and the Hollywood Foreign Press a lot, I gotta say, I respect them clarifying the position, codifying it, putting it down in their rules. And I gotta say, did they have to do that? No, but I kind of agree with it. Aaron, you and I have not talked about this, but as an actress, what are your thoughts on that move by the Golden Globes?
I agree with you. It is wonderful that they came out. Also, that they came out before a lot of the other awards organizations and said, this is where we stand. You guys can do whatever you want to do, but this is our policy, so that it really establishes them as the leader at this point versus them as, following whatever somebody, whatever the Academy is going to do. Considering the fact that the Screen Actors Guild, which obviously has the prestigious SAG Awards.
And you are a part of.
Which I am a part of, yes. Have been for 20 years. The fact that the Screen Actors Guild, the SAG Awards, do not consider voice acting and motion capture acting to be considered for their awards. And this is an organization that is run by and made up of nothing but actors. That also says a considerable amount of even where actors feel that voice actors and motion capture actors belong. I will say this, if and when the time ever comes where there is an Academy Award or any other sort of award for voice acting and motion capture, it would be a crime if Andy Serkis did not immediately win an honorary award, not only for his performances in The Hobbit, in King Kong, in Return of the Planet, one of the 8 movies.
All the 8 movies.
But also for his incredible advocacy in order to bring awareness to the rigors and to the challenges of a motion capture performance. What I don't understand is, the Saturn Awards, which are phenomenal awards, very well respected.
Rob has a couple of those.
He does.
Rob has a couple of Saturn Awards, yes.
I have been to the Saturn Awards, also very entertaining award show. The Saturn Awards specifically are for the genres of fantasy, science fiction, and horror, which are all genres that specifically incorporate voice and motion capture performances, which are very technical and not something that most actors can do. I like your analogy with the car. I would reverse it though. I think that the performance without the face is the car without the steering wheel. The steering wheel being the face and all that. But you look at Andy Serkis and what he did in all those movies that we've said, Scarlett Johansson, but also our perception of Scarlett Johansson's performance was absolutely part of her performance and what she gave. She was brilliant.
Yeah.
But also we have to give credit to Joaquin Phoenix because Juliet in Romeo and Juliet was never supposed to be a beautiful woman. If you ever see a performance of Romeo and Juliet is stunningly gorgeous, it's wrong. We believe that she is stunningly gorgeous because of the way that Romeo sees her. Behold, what light when yonder, that whole thing. And so similarly, the way that Joaquin saw her, we saw her through his eyes. So I want to give credit to Joaquin for his performance in that. But, you look at Benedict Cumberbatch in The Hobbit.
Yep.
There's a great YouTube video of him actually doing with the motion capture suit on, even though they didn't use his body, he physicalized it so much that it really is, like you said, a completely separate type of performance. When I was studying in London, we had classes like when you go to acting school, there's movement classes. I had a class where literally for an entire week we had to be fire, and then the next week we had to be water, and then like all the elements. Every time you're in a class, they go, okay, well, what animal would your character be? And a person moves differently if they are a snake versus if they are a panther, versus if they're a bull, And so these types of performances require a very, very different type of acting, and usually classically trained actors are better suited for this. What I would love to be introduced is for the Saturn Awards, who specifically work in this world, to introduce best performance by a motion capture artist, and have that as an award, establish that in the Saturn Awards, which I think would very easily transition into acknowledgement by the SAG Awards, which I think will then very easily transition into the other awards. I think we're close, but if anybody out there is with the Saturn Awards, I would love to see that as a Saturn Awards.
I think one of the things that is a roadblock to that right now is that when you look at, say, a category cinematography, there's 1,000 potential qualifying nominees per year. When you look at best performances, there's 1,000 potential qualifying nominees per year. How many motion capture, how big is even the pool right now?
Right,
for motion Is it too small of a pool?
That's a good point.
That's a roadblock right now, but as technology advances, that could change in the future.
I mean, look at the entire cast of Avatar. Well,
Yeah.
not the entire cast, because we obviously do have some live, but when we go into the world, I think that you're right. As we continue to have films increasing the technology and the capabilities and the cost effectiveness, frankly, of doing motion capture and CGI, it is definitely a conversation that I think will continue and will only evolve and expand. But I absolutely agree. You just cannot compare a live action performance with the performance of someone who then is going to have their face digitally covered and all of their facial responses. I remember Winona Ryder once said about Angelina Jolie after Girl Interrupted, she said she has this incredible ability to make her capillaries explode on cue, talking about how Angelina Jolie just has this ability to get flush and change the color of her face, on at a whim. And so that's something that if you are a motion capture actor, no matter how much, you're just never going to see that, even if it's physically happening in real time. There's so many other layers that go into creating that whole performance.
This is weird because I've had a little bit of a different perspective on it in that, when you look at what Andy Serkis has done, I actually made an argument with his last Apes movie, the last one that he did. His performance in it was so, and you watch all the behind the scenes stuff of it's him, right? I made the argument at the time. And I might have a few different perspectives on it now, but basically at the time, though, my thought was everything that you see in Caesar is Andy Serkis's performance. He's got all the motion sensors on his face, his facial expressions, his movements, his voice clearly, blah, blah, blah. And I remember me and John Schnepp had this conversation once, and I remember asking at the time, at what point, now this is different from voice-only actors versus actors who do a full motion, but at what point do we look at motion capture as just a digital version of a costume? Because we have actors who put on costumes that tailors make, apply their makeup to make them look a certain way, do their hair to do a certain way. At what point, and again, I'm not saying I have a hard position on this, I don't, but I remember at what point I was thinking, at what point do we say, okay, all that's different here is that instead of a physical costumer coming in and putting this costume on Andy Serkis, we have a digital artist coming and putting the costume on Andy Serkis, but it's all his movements, it's his expressions. And I'm just wondering, when do we get to that point where like CGI embodiment, like Josh, why am I forgetting on the guy who played Thanos? Brolin. Like Brolin in playing Thanos, right? Like Thanos, he did all the motion capture. You even you saw his face.
Yeah, he looks like Thanos.
Right? At what point do we just say that, if you are truly fully physically doing the motion capture, and it's not just doing the voice and then animators do it all later, at what point do we say that's just a costume? And I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I'm not saying we're there yet, but
that's why I think it would be its own category, because I would compare Andy Serkis's performance as as Gollum to a Josh Brolin performance as Thanos. Those two are comparable. Those two could be in a category together, and you go, okay, well, between these two performances, which one would be deserving of the award? But to compare, his performance in that versus whoever's performance, in a live action film, yes, it may be Andy Serkis's facial expressions, but it's not the tear that comes down, you know what I mean? So it would be similar to comparing a theatrical performance, like in a theater, a live theater, a play, to a performance in a film. They require completely different skill sets.
That's a good point. Question here is, guys, what do you think about this move by the Hollywood Foreign Press and Golden Globes? I actually got to say, I respect it. I kind of do, but I could see an argument being made against it. What do you guys think? Jump down to the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.